Okay, then let us start. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all listeners out there. Wherever you are based, I would like to warmly welcome you to the 7th edition of the DWP KnowNow webinar. My name is Katharina Schilling. I'm the head of the IWD Secretariat, and my association is implementing the DWP, the Danube Water Program, jointly with our colleagues from the World Bank for more than 9 years now. Today, I have the pleasure to moderate a great panel on an important topic: drought of sight, drought of mind, relevance and risks of droughts for the water service sector in the Danube region. But before I start introducing my guests today, please let me do some housekeeping. And for that, I would like to quickly share my screen. So there you go. For your information, this session will be recorded and made available on demand. And following the DWP KnowNow webinar, the recording, the presentation slides, and also the session summaries will be published on the Voice of the Danube website. Also for your info, you have two ways of interacting with us. One would be the chat box. You can use that for general requests and also interactions with other participants. So please feel free to introduce yourself or let us know where you're from. On the other hand, we have the Q&A box, and please use that one to send questions to the panelists. Please note that we cannot respond to raised hands as attendees' microphones are muted. Having said that, I would like to come to the topic. And during the summer, you have probably seen it on TV, you have followed it on the internet, pictures of dry riverbeds, historic artifacts reappearing in riverbeds, reservoirs running out of water. And also the press was full of headlines such as Europe was once green and water rich, now it's more and more like California, that was in the LA Times on 4th of September. Or China, Europe, US drought is 22 the driest year recorded, which was BBC News, also in September. Or finally, Europe's farmers bring in drought-scared maize crop on Reuters, 7th of October. So as you can see, this year, Europe and also other parts of the world have been affected by extreme events such as droughts and heat waves. And the deficits in precipitation and also snow accumulation had a severe impact on the water resources, specifically in the Po and the Danube, but also other regions. So while severe droughts have occurred in the past, the 2022 extreme event might be the worst on the record. And if this is truly the case, and if droughts like this may become the norm in the context of climate change, our first speaker will discuss in his presentation. Having said that, let me introduce my guests today. We have our speaker, Mr. Andrea Toretti, he's senior researcher at the Joint Research Center, European Commission. Then, following the pictures, as I can see you, Mr. Stjepan Gabric, Senior Water Supply and Sanitation Specialist, World Bank, based in Croatia. Then Mr. Vjekoslav Poropac, he is Technical Manager at Istarski Vodovod, Usat, Croatia. I have Mr. Andrea Di Piazza, Senior Analyst, Utilitalia in Italy. And finally, last but not least, Mr. Roland Limberger, he's Independent Non-Revenue Water Advisor in Austria. So with these great guests on my panel, let us jump into the topic. And so I would like to ask Andrea now to share and to provide his presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So let me share the presentation with you all. I hope you can already see it appearing. I'm now trying to give you a brief overview of what has happened this year, but also to put in place the event of this year more in a historical, so with respect to the recent past, but also with the future decades, with the projections and what the future could look like. As we know, I'm trying, sorry, to change slide. Hope it works. Okay, so as you know, we work and we try to investigate, characterize, and understand better climate extremes as they pose a threat to all key socioeconomic sectors as well as natural systems. And Europe, as you know, and has been already said during the introduction of this event, Europe, as well as other regions of the world, have suffered extreme events such as drought and heat waves. Indeed, it was not just Europe, it was China, it was also East Africa, but also South America that has been suffering since 2019 a severe drought with important and serious consequences on several sectors in the La Plata Basin. So this is why we work on these extremes, and we try to improve the way we understand, the way we characterize, the way we can predict. Here, just for you, two images describing the drought of 2022. The one on the left side is the Po River, and you see the extremely low level of the river. And another one, it's an alpine lake that already dried out in March this year. So this year was indeed, as you already perhaps know, really exceptional. But it was not just a summer or spring to summer event. In some areas of Europe, the drought started already in December 2021. We can for sure mention the Iberian Peninsula, the situation that already in December was affecting large regions across Spain and Portugal, but also the southeastern part of France and the northwestern part of the Italian peninsula. And of course, already showing serious negative anomalies in terms of soil moisture. And of course, the situation deteriorated along the winter. And you see here, for instance, the conditions in terms of precipitation deficit on the plot on the map in the upper part of the slide in the left side. You see that the precipitation deficit February in the western part of Italy, or associated, of course, again with negative anomalies in terms of soil moisture. This severe precipitation deficit was also associated with warmer than usual conditions, and the first estimates were pointing to the exceptionality of the winter that was observed compared to the previous decades. And of course, already at that time, the severe precipitation deficit was having impacts on resources, water resources, as well as hydropower systems. And the Po River clearly was severely affected. This is a picture showing the hazard connected with the low flow in the Po River, and you see that already in March the hazard was extremely high. So the Po River was already in a very critical condition. It was also linked to the very poor snowfall accumulation. Here you see two plots showing the snow water equivalent over the Italian Alps and over the northwestern part of the Italian Alps. The black line shows the snow water equivalent in 2022, and the red line show the average condition, the one that you would expect on average over the Alps. You see clearly the deficit that was accumulating during the winter season. And in March, clearly the situation got really worse, and as you can see, large areas in the Po River Basin, as well as in the Danube River Basin, were suffering a serious precipitation deficit. But also in March, extremely a large portion of Europe was suffering from a deficit, from a lack of precipitation. And clearly, the snowfall accumulation didn't recover at all in the Alps. And you see that the hazard, it was not just affecting the Po River, but also the Danube. And you see the very high hazard as pointed out by our analysis looking at the low flow index at the end of March 2022, but also at the very low levels recorded, for instance, in Budapest in the period 25th March, 22nd of April. And clearly, it evolved in a way that in summer, at the beginning of August, more than 60% of the European territory was, with different, of course, levels, affected by this drought. But the drought was also, and the impacts of this year drought, they were all enhanced by a sequence of heat waves that started relatively earlier than usual this year, already in May in some parts of Europe. This extreme sequence of heat waves, of course, contributed to make the drought worse, but also the impacts of the drought worse. And we experienced seawater intrusions. Just to mention that in the Po River Basin, for instance, the seawater entered inland up to almost 40 kilometers, causing, of course, issues in terms of soil saline ingestion and so on. There were clear water supply issues, dike stability, for instance, in the Netherlands, but also the river transport was severely affected. In August, the Rhine River was suffering, and the entire transportation sector was suffering from the critical conditions of the Rhine River. The energy, of course, was one of the sectors mostly affected, not just the hydropower, but also the thermal and the nuclear power plant. And clearly, agriculture suffered these extreme conditions. Crops such as grain maize, soybean, sunflower, and rice, they all suffered, and we estimated significant losses in all these crops. Just to mention some estimates to be, of course, confirmed at the EU level, compared to the last 5 years, grain maize this year recorded a minus 19%, and rice a minus 21%. These are just estimates, but they give the feeling of the impacts of this exceptional event. And of course, in July and August, the situation was still very critical in most of the European rivers, the Danube included. As you can see from these two maps showing the low flow index and the others connected with the low flow index that we use at the global and European drought observatories in July on the left and August on the right. Of course, these kind of drought events have already occurred in the past. We all, I think, remember the 2018 drought that affected Central and Northern Europe. Of course, the 2018 was an extreme drought, but we were in a way lucky because thanks to the favorable conditions that the southern part of Europe experienced, basically the impacts and the shocks that may have caused didn't propagate. And in the end, at the European level, the effects were rather limited, thanks to this, what we call seesaw mechanism, a dipole in the conditions connected with precipitation. Of course, other events have been affected Europe, for instance, in 2003, as you, I think, all remember, in 1976. This is just, a map to show indeed the area that was affected by these famous events, the one in 1976, the one in 2003, and the one in 2015. But of course, 2018 was one of the, or let's say the worst on record, if we look at the central part of Europe, in a very long-term, let's say, climatic context, at least by looking at the last 500 years. Indeed, by using paleoclimate reconstructions and looking at all spring to summer reconstructed conditions from 1500, basically, we estimated that there were no other years as worse as 2018 in Central Europe. And this year, clearly, the conditions were worse. So we are still evaluating, but I mean, the preliminary analysis and also the evaluation and the monitoring that we have been doing point to these extreme conditions. The only event that was getting, or let's say, close or very similar to 2018 is the famous 1540 drought event that was affecting large part of Europe. With effects that have been recorded in chronicles and also collected by our colleague Pfister in a paper in 2017, describing the impacts on the Rhine, the impacts on agriculture, the impacts on livestock. So it's really, I mean, interesting to see an historical, such an event described in terms of impacts so well in these chronicles. And when we look at the future, we want to understand what are the risks connected with this drought event. And of course, we want also to understand what are the regions more exposed. And by looking at climate projections under different warming scenarios, we see that on the left panel of this slide, you see that basically all regions of the world are going to experience an increase in the average drought severity. So this is really a clear message. A drought is not just a local or a regional challenge, it's a global challenge. And if we won't be able to limit global warming, you see the effects going from 1.5 degrees of global warming up to 4 degrees of global warming. But also, we estimate that unprecedented events might emerge, so events that we have never experienced before. And when we look at what has happened, for instance, in 2018, because it's something that we have really recently experienced, such an event might become, according to climate projections, under a scenario where we won't be able to effectively mitigate climate change. Basically, we see that already in mid-century, this kind of extreme drought events might become the norm. Not only, as it is shown by the right plot in this slide, it might affect larger and larger regions of Europe, in this case of Central Europe. But the yellowish colors are really indicating where this increase in the area affected by extreme drought, as extreme or even more extreme than in 2018. And this might become the norm already in mid-century, meaning that they might occur almost every year. And when we think of this kind of extreme drought events, of course, just to give you a feeling, they might have a huge impact on sectors such as agriculture. If we look, for instance, at durum wheat, just to give you an idea of the potential impacts of such recurrent and extreme drought events, this might trigger or might induce huge losses in climate suitability of durum wheat producing areas of Europe. The red areas indeed are denoting the ones that are currently devoted to durum wheat production that might become climatically unsuitable for durum wheat under future climate conditions. Mid-century in the upper part of the left panel, end of the century in the lower part of the left map in this slide. And you see that these are indeed induced by an increase of drought events, as shown by the figure on the right side of this slide. And it's going to affect all the different regions. We also estimated that the global scale, for instance, in the US, in Canada, and the signal is always the same. Just to remark once more that drought is not and won't be a local or regional challenge, but it's going to be a global one. So just to conclude, so 2022 has been an exceptional event because it has been persistent, severe, and broad. The heat waves, the extreme heat waves that Europe has experienced amplified the drought events and enhanced also the impacts. And the extreme combined event, the drought and heat wave, seems to be the worst on record, of course, to be confirmed when we will finalize the ongoing analysis. The risk in the future, it's a global risk. So there are no regions in the world that have no risk when it comes to extreme drought. And these kind of events might become the norm if no effective mitigation and adaptation strategies will be put in place now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for this really interesting and up-to-date summary of what has happened in Europe and globally during that summer, but even longer, and also actually the rather scaring projections that you showed us. I mean, from what I understood, the topic of water availability will also become an issue in the Danube region. And I think this is why we have to clearly build resilience in the water service sector. So with that in mind, I would like to turn to our panelists. First on my list, I have the other Andrea Di Piazza. We could read about the effects of drought in Italy a lot in the media. It would be great if you could share with us your immediate feedback on the presentation and also provide us some insights on how the drought has affected the water service sector in Italy.
Yeah, good morning, Katerina. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having us, first of all, and thank you for Dr. Andrea Toretti of the very interesting presentation. As said, indeed, drought 2022 in Italy will be remembered as the worst in 70 years, basically. If we consider that from the first 6 months of the year, almost 7 months of the year, there was almost only 50% of the amount of rainfall on average, if we compare the same period along the last 30 years. As well, snowfall fell by 70% on the Alps compared to the historical average. So the water that is stored usually in snow and glaciers disappeared, basically. And several rivers have greatly reduced their flows, such as lake levels that has been reduced by this drought. And as said before, also at the Po mouth, there is the longest river in Italy, a river along where a third of Italy's population live, and where there are the main agricultural activities. Indeed, at the Po mouth, we register an extended salt wedge intrusion that affected agricultural activities in this area. So with this in mind, the national government declared a state of emergency last summer and cooperated with the National Civil Protection and district observatories on water uses that has local impact to apply short-term measures, first of all, to try to ensure drinking water supply to the population, but then also to ensure the biological balance of rivers and of lakes, of course, and to avoid the salt wedge intrusion at the mouth of the Po River. So some regions have, for example, anticipated the application of the so-called minimal vital flow of the rivers in order to store as much water as possible. And as well, some point of distribution of drinkable water has been created, also fed by tank, to try to distribute drinkable water to the population in order to ensure drinking water supply. It was there has been a construction of temporary reservoir and accumulation, as well as a recharging point for aquifers, for example, or additional pumping systems. Where it was possible, also the interconnections between existing water networks, especially in northern Italy, that has been much more affected by the drought respect to the rest of the country. About the measures to ensure the biological balance, for example, the initial increase in the release from large alpine lakes has been first indeed increased by 20% compared to ordinary value, but then it has been reduced due to the lack of precipitation to protect the lake life and also the touristic activities. And then there has been a 20% reduction in irrigation withdrawals at the district level compared to the average values of the same period. But of course, these are measures that can work in the short terms, but in the short term, but in the long term, we need investments. And these investments must be addressed, first of all, in reduced leakages that in Italy are on average around 42%. with a giant difference between the northern part of Italy, where the water network is in a good state, respect to the south of the country. Imagine that in Milan, the total leakages are around 14%, while in Syracuse, in Sicily, they amount to up to almost 70%. It's important, of course, also to reach an efficient use of water resources. So, for example, we should address better the governance related to the reuse of purified water, especially for agricultural uses, and then to plan new storage structures, especially in the medium term. So, for example, new reservoirs, new basins, or not only for the water, for the meteoric water, but also for the reuse water. And then try to produce complementary water resources where is it possible. So, for example, through desalinator plants. Some of these investments were already boosted by the Recovery and Resilience Facility that has been created by the European Commission. The Italian National Recovery and Resilience Plan offers a great opportunity to accelerate investments in the water sector. Imagine that the plan has earmarked almost 4.4 billion of euros for sustainable management of water resources intervention. The majority of these funds are addressed for primary water infrastructure, and so to enhance the security of water supply. And almost 1.5 billion are addressed to reduce water leakages and to try to enhance the digitalization and monitoring of the water network. Utilitalia, the federation which I represent, and ARERA, the authority that regulates water system in Italy, estimate an amount of between 10 and 14 billion of euros of investment in the sector in Italy. So is it clear that the resources of the National Resilience and Recovery Plan are not enough, but they just can boost this huge amount of investments that can greatly increase the quantity of water available, that has been estimated between 600 million cubic meters and 1 billion cubic meters. So as the last IPCC report states, the Mediterranean is a climate hotspot, and we are seeing an increase of drought events, as we said in the presentation before. So the frequency of extreme phenomena can increase. And so for this reason, it is important to invest in monitoring, in digitalization, in human capital, of course, as well as in new infrastructure to make the system more resilient to climate change.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And on the topic of investments, I would like to come back during the discussion later on. But before we do that, I would like to invite Vyacheslav Poropat to provide his feedback on the presentation, but also please provide us an overview about your experience as a utility in terms of the water service provision in this summer. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. I tell you some data about our company where we work to understand something. We work in Istria and we sell the water to all the region except Pula and Labin, but we sell to Pula about 5 million cubic meter. We are one of the first 5 water company in Croatia. We sell about 20 million cubics every year. We have on our system about 2,500 kilometers of the network, different diameters, about 96 reservoir, 66 breaking chambers, about 350 pressure reduced station, 55 pump station, and about 65,000 water meter. In our region live about 100,000 people, but we are tourist region. In normal day, in the tourist season, in August, we have about 250,000 tourists more. 3.5% of the people in our region, summer, winter. We have 3 resources. The first is Gradule with a nominal capacity, 1,100 liters per second. Difference in this resource is 300 liters per second, for example, this year, to 9,000 liters per second in the winter. We have Sveti Ivan. The capacity of the Sveti Ivan is about 300 liters per second. This summer we have 80 liters per second on this resource, and the reserve resource is Bulaj with the capacity of 500 liters per second. Of course, for flexibility of the system, we have a lake. Lake is very important to our distribution. For example, in 2021, we use from the lake about 4 million cubic meters. This year, we need about 6 million cubic meters. Lake, this year is very difficult for us. This is combination of very dry year with no rain and the tourist record. If you put this together, you have a problem. We have a problem. Okay, but we start to work to flexibility of our system in 1980. Then we connect Bulaj and Gradule. This is first connection to 2 different systems. Second connection we do when we connect Botonega with Gradule, and in few last years we connect Botonega with Sveti Ivan. Now all our systems are connected and we have very flexible distribution. We have reduction consumption this year, but only for 3 things. First is watering grass. Second is no washing your car, and a reduction of the consumption on the beaches. These 3 things. Unbelievable data is when people don't watering grass in our home, we have 17% less consumption in our system. 17. We don't have a problem with agriculture in Istria. Agriculture is maybe 5 to 10% of our consumption. Okay, this year is very dry, and if we don't have rain in next 15 days, we start to pump from Bulaj to Lake Botonega. We do this last year also, and we pump about 2 million cubic meters. Without this, we have a big problem. Now, I think we start from in next 15 days, if we don't have a rain, we start to pump to Botonega. We need from Botonega about 6 million cubics to survive the season and don't have a problem in distribution. We do some steps and we talk with the Hrvatske vode to rise up level of the lake for 80 centimeters. It's very simple and very cheap, but if we rise up the level of the lake for 80 centimeters, we have 2 million cubics more of the water from the season. Our message is connect all system, and of course we have leakage in our system is about 17%. We have enough water in winter. Leakage is not problem in winter, leakages problem in summer, not financial problem. The biggest cost if tourism don't have enough water, this is very expensive. We have in our system, I think, about 4 million cubic meters leakage every year. This costs us about 1 million euro in energy, of course, because of the terrain we use from every cubic meter about 115 kilowatt hour. It's our power consumption for pumping. If we pay this is about 1 million euro. This is not a problem, 1 million euro. You can build for 1 million euro 2 kilometers of the network. It's not, but problem is if you don't have enough water in summer, this is the problem, and this is the problem from tourism and for people who live in our region. Because of that, we tried to 1980 to our losses are our leakage are smaller and smaller and smaller. 17% I think is not bad, but maybe we can be better than 17%. Our record is, I think, 2005 is a 14%. We have very, very old network system. Sveti Ivan built 1934. Coast system gradually built 1970, and Botaniga is only system built in this century. It's very old system. Because of that, I think maybe we are satisfied with this leakage, but you can do better. This one. I think this is for the beginning enough for me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vyacheslav, for this very concise summary of your utility. I mean, from what I understand, you have two main issues. On the one hand, a big variation in water availability between or during the season. On the other hand, really variations also in terms of your consumers due to tourism, and you manage to outbalance that on the one hand due to this lake and this water reservoir that you have, and on the other hand due to a really well managed system that is interconnected. I would like to come back later on again during the discussion also on the fact that you could reduce the use of water by reducing the watering of the grass, because I think that involves quite a bit of communication also with your consumers, and I would really like to learn how that works. But before we do that, I would like to turn over to my colleague, Stjepan Gabric, who is here with me today as well. Stjepan, in Croatia, we know that areas of small watersheds in the Black Sea River and also the Adriatic River basin are super sensitive to the impact of climate change. You're working for the World Bank, and the bank has carried out, on the one hand, I think the Croatian coastal study, but also an analytical work, or is doing analytical work in the context of water loss reduction in Croatia. So on the one hand, I would ask you to, on the one hand, provide your feedback to the presentation, but also share some thoughts and insights on the work that is ongoing.
Thank you, Katya. I mean, let me just present what the World Bank is doing, and this is fit nicely with what just Vyacheslav has presented. Now, the coastal regions, not only of Croatia, and certain the situation in Italy and other Mediterranean countries is very similar, are suffering from double-sized phenomena. On one side, we have a drought and extended periods with no rain or very little rain, as Andrea has presented. So basically, our availability of the water quantity and precipitation go down. This is also reflected, as Vyacheslav has just said, you know, his capacity of his water source goes from 300 liters to 80 liters in the summer period. So on one side, your supplies goes down. On the other side, demand keeps going up because of the higher temperature. So, you know, people are more thirsty, the garden needs more water, etc. Plus, what you can witness throughout the Mediterranean, it's a growing development. I mean, new buildings, new houses, new apartment buildings are, piling up. So you have on one side your supply and availability of water going down, on the other side, demand's going up. And there you have basically this serious conflict that at some point system will not be able to supply. I mean, it's also interesting that, last few days I actually spent by pure coincidence in Istria, and you should see this large number of new buildings being constructed, basically only focused on summer tourists, okay? Otherwise, I mean, nobody lives there. And yet, nobody is asking, do we have enough water for all these new developments? So that literally the thousands of new developments that will host tens of thousands of more people only in the summer is being developed without in the same time checking, can we actually supply them with adequate quantity of the water? And the people today expect certain standard. They open the tap, the shower goes, the grass is green in front of the house, etc., etc. So clearly in this tourist area, particularly in the Mediterranean region, the challenge is growing up to the point that it will become at some point very serious limiting factor for further development of tourism in the area. What the World Bank has done, we have prepared a study that was looking at this challenge in the coastal part of Croatia, looking at the impact of climate change on the temperature and on rain precipitation, basically availability of the water. On the other side, looking at the projected increase of tourism and see how big this gap is going to be between the supply and demand and how this gap could actually be covered. You can actually cover it in a few ways. You can cover it by, water reduction, which is not very popular measure because, people pay a lot of money to be on summer holidays. They like to have water 24/7 and basically unlimited quantity. You can cover it as they have an Istrian water supply company, Istarski vodovod, with this artificial lake accumulation where you accumulate large amount of water, then you basically over the year, and then you basically distribute it during the critical period. But this is first costly and it takes time. The Istria water supply system that Mr. Poropat has explained, it hasn't been developed overnight. This has been developed over the decades. So multifunctionality they have and the benefit they have as the artificial lake reservoir is actually a very rare case. I'm not really certain is there any other similar artificial lake in Croatia for the purpose. Might be maybe Peruća or something like this, but very few. Mostly there is no such possibility. So on one side, if we do not really have this possibility and our resources are limited, you have third option. And third option is that you have certain volume of water hidden in water losses. So if average water losses in Croatia are 50%, and if you reduce this to 25%, which is actually not that demanding, you actually free or actually create substantial amount of available water that you can actually use to cover the gap between the dwindling supply and raising demand. Calculation and study analytical work that we have done actually show that this would, in the case of Croatia, would be sufficient until 2035. This was the time horizon in which we were looking, that basically reduction of water losses will create or actually will give us sufficient quantity of water to cover this demand. That basically puts moves the ball, moves the responsibility basically into developing not only water losses reduction programs, something that the World Bank together with the Ministry and European Commission is now doing for Croatia, but also preparing a financial investment framework in which this rehabilitation of the pipes will actually take place. Yes, you can reduce water losses with active measure for water losses reduction, but up to some point, if you have as Mr. Poropat again said, if you have almost 100 years old pipeline, yeah, you can reduce it to some level, but eventually, you have to think in advance how you're gonna replace those aging pipelines with those that will eventually have less losses. And then a little bit about the other activity that you mentioned. This is our regional water security initiative. Basically, it's another analytical work that aims to create better understanding of what is the ongoing and future water security challenges at the regional and national level. The study, there is a regional study, then there's an individual study looking at individual countries of the region. Bottom line is the World Bank is fully understand this level of challenges that we are facing, and we are active at the national level, but also at the regional level with our or national activities related to water losses, or this regional water security analytical work that are trying to highlight the challenges, possible solutions, and lesson learned in order how to reduce water security risk in individual countries. So that's briefly what the World Bank is doing, but I think this issue will become highly relevant. It's in this moment most visible in the coastal tourist area because of this major disproportion between the winter. It's irony that in the winter you have plenty of water and you have no consumers, and then in the summer you have little water and you have much more consumers. So it's kind of irony: when you have a people, you don't have a water; when you have a water, you don't have a people to supply. Anyway, as an engineer, as a technical person, it's up to us to find a solution, and the solution is very simple. You need to think in advance, you need to plan, and you need to make your system resilient to drought and resilience to this kind of shocks. So that's briefly from my side. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stipe, for that summary. And in terms of resilience, I mean, if we have the time, I would maybe later on also discuss the topics that Andrea Di Piazza mentioned, like water reuse, desalination. If you find the time, what do you think about that? But before that, I would like to turn to Roland now, Roland Limberger. Roland, in non-revenue water circles, you're one of the experts on water loss. And as we have just heard from Stipe, at least in Croatia, water loss reduction seems to be one of the key measures to counteract the impact of climate change. We have heard now of two very different examples during that webinar in the context of water loss management. On the one hand, about Italy with like north-south differentiation, but especially in the south, huge water loss. On the other hand, the utility from Vjekoslav, who's obviously handling the system really, really well. So in addition to providing your feedback on the overall presentation, I would also like to ask you, from your experience, what the situation in the Danube region is. Do we face more like Italy's, or do we face more Istarsky waterworks? Thank you.
Well, mixed, very mixed. I'm at the moment in Zagreb, and we were just the last 2 days we were discussing about the performance of the different utilities. And here it's not an Italian north-south thing, so it's total mixed. And I was shocked, I will not mention names, but I was shocked when I heard that some really well-known names, well-known cities have such high losses that the Italians can be happy about their level of losses. And on the other hand, you have Istria, the two utilities in Istria, which are doing a marvelous job. So we see this shows us it is not only about money. Yeah, of course we need money, and it was quite rightly said, eventually we will have to change the old pipes and so on. But the most important thing is we need to start to do something. And as you can see from my gray, white beard here, I'm doing this all my professional life, and this is already quite long. And we always talk about it. Yes, we need to reduce water losses. We need to reduce water losses. And how many success stories have I seen? Not many, because there is so often there's a total lack of political will. What do we want to do? We, like Stipe said, we don't care. We want to have new tourist developments. We don't think about where the water is coming from. This will lead to intermittent supply. If we have intermittent supply, we damage our pipes. We will even increase our leakage. Then we have, if we do an investment, then we want to have a new treatment plant, a new pumping station, a new desalination plant, because then the politicians can come and cut the red ribbon, and this is nice. And nobody has interest to excavate hundreds of leaks and repair them. And this is the big problem. And it sometimes, and it is high time to start. We should have started 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but already now I hope that everyone really woke up with this extreme drought in Europe, and every utility should start make plans and think, what can we do with our present budget, with how much will we need in future, what are the ideas, because we have the tools, we have the equipment, we have the know-how. It's not rocket science, it just needs to be done.
Thank you, Roland. With that statement, I mean, do something, but which seems not to be too easy. I would like to now engage our audience, and I would like to ask you for a question. I saw that one question already came in and was already answered by you, Andrea, but still, maybe because I'm not sure if everyone from the audience has seen it, maybe you could briefly summarize your response on that. And the question was related to the different users in the water sector and the competition between, for example, agriculture, environment, hydropower, etc. So could you please briefly outline?
Yeah, sure. Indeed, the question was related to how do we see the situation between different water user and potential competition, especially agriculture. As I was answering to Raymond, so thank you for your question. Regarding agriculture, in Italy, agriculture represents 51% of water consumption. Of course, the main issue is to try to find a national legal framework and policies addressed to reuse water for irrigation, because of course we have a huge amount of wastewater to be treated, then can use, for example, for irrigation use. The problem is that right now we are a bit on delay on this topic, and so the country is trying to encourage the reuse of water, especially for non-domestic use.
Thanks, Andrea, for that. I mean, because we're right now talking about water reuse, I would like to put the question forward to Stipe that I was mentioning before. In Croatia, I mean, is water reuse, is desalination, is that something that could come up?
Doesn't exist. I mean, it doesn't. I mean, you know, I was thinking just as, you know, like previous speaker was talking, I mean, you know, from the purely engineering point, we can supply only almost unlimited quantities of water. We can basically desalinate the whole sea. We can, you know, treat to the ridiculous level all the wastewater. So in theory, if you have endless amount of money, sure, we can provide, I mean, of course, I mean, certain logical limit. You know, I remember there was a few years ago, the World Bank study tour to Israel. Israel is basically reusing, I think, 95% of its wastewater, developing very advanced agriculture and making money from it. So not only they're actually doing it, they're actually profiting from this. In the same time, I think the current value of the water that's coming from desalination is 40 to 50% of water in Israel is coming from the 5-6 large desalination water plants. So, I mean, yes, things could be done. But however, there is a price to be paid. Okay. Again, Israel is a very good example how this could be actually combined and, you know, even some, you know, profit generated. But unfortunately, in this part of the world, I don't really think. First, there is no need because essentially we have a water. We are beside a few small regions. I mean, we have a water. You know, the reason why Istria Regional Water Supply Company was established because the central part of the peninsula actually had the water, but not that many population. But then the coastal area had the population, but didn't have a water. So they have a regional water supply scheme. You have similar in Montenegro. Again, it takes planning, it takes action. Yes, we can reuse, but I would even say that, you know, reuse, etc. It's usually associated with not only costs, but also certain mental perception of the consumers about how safe this water is and not is. And frankly, I don't really see a burning need in our region to resort to this approach. We essentially have water. We just have to plan, invest, smartly use it, and then basically take the advantage of resources we actually have in Europe. We just need to adequately use them and plan in advance and develop infrastructure, having that in mind. Last point, Vjekoslav mentioned this watering of grass. Yesterday, as I was walking close to Medulin, and there's some new development, and they have a grass in front of the houses, which is, you look like you are in Ireland. It's a perfect green glass by any standard. I mean, I was born in Dalmatia in the cold. Sorry, guys, this is not normal. I mean, you cannot expect in the middle of the summer, in the middle of the Mediterranean, to have Irish-style garden grass around your house. I mean, there is something, we need to accept where we live. We live in the Mediterranean. You have certain restriction, you have certain architectural style, you have also certain type of garden. So do not try to create something which is not basically sustainable in Mediterranean region, for example.
Thanks, Stipe, and thanks for this last comment, because I just wanted to ask Vjekoslav how they managed to raise the awareness about or within their consumers to stop watering the grass. Because did you just inform them that this is needed, or did you have a certain campaign to do that, or how was that achieved so easily? And by doing that, reducing the water consumption by like 15 or 17%, I think you said. You have to unmute, please.
Yes, this is political decision. This is order from the politician. But they don't punish anyone. People in our region are very, very disciplined people. They listen. He said, don't water in the grass. And in 2 days, we have 70% less consumption. It's very strange, but this is this. Politicians said, it's no need. They understand. If they don't stop watering the grass for 15 days or for 1 month, they don't have a water from tourists. If you put on balance green grass and no water for shower, from anything in your house, they decide, okay, maybe it's the better solution to don't have a green grass. And people decide very good in this moment. They said, okay, if you don't listen to us for 15 days, 13 days, you don't have a water. We don't have exception. Football court, everything, don't stop. Grass in my home is yellow, but not yellow from August. 2 months, I wait to be yellow. I cannot problem anymore with this. I have no time. But people put on the balance these two things, and I think that is good decision from the people.
No, it's
I
absolutely.
think you decide same.
Yes, it's absolutely.
If you have tourists, and we said,
yes.
Okay, you can have a green grass, but for 15 days you don't have a tourist. Why you need green grass if you don't have a tourist?
Totally makes sense.
Kati, just for the records, we are not grass haters as such. I mean, we do not, fundamentally. I love grass, but let's be reasonable.
I don't.
It's great if we can be reasonable, and if obviously the government is reasonable. So totally makes sense for me. I would like to draw your attention to a comment by Barbara Chencho-Kurk. I hope I somehow pronounced it correctly, on the reuse of wastewater. So maybe you would like to give it a read, and I would ask you then to come in with certain comments, or you can answer it directly. But I would now to also come back to Andrea Toretti, because you are from the Joint Research Center, so also connected to the European Commission. Could you outline what kind of activities the JRC has regarding drought management or drought assessment and vulnerability in Europe, what you're doing? Because obviously it's a huge risk for all Europe.
Yes, yeah, we actually have several different activities at the moment that are addressing drought, concerning monitoring as well as management. So at the moment, I think it is worth to mention one initiative that has been actually supported by the EU Parliament, engaging us together with the DGM, so the Director General on the Environment of the European Commission, that is called the DORA, where we are basically working on enhancing drought resilience and adaptation. And we are also together with representative of member states working in a recently established ad hoc task group on water scarcity and drought. So these are two initiatives that together are indeed aiming at reviewing existing drought management plans, enhancing cooperation among European member states, but also bringing a new approach when it comes to drought. The idea is indeed to move from a simple drought-focused risk approach to a multi-sectoral risk approach by looking not just at the event, but also at the evolution of the risk in all the different sectors.
Thanks, Andrea. I see that another statement came in from Peter mentioning Israel again, and also mentioning that they have a very effective tariff system. And because of that, I would like to draw another question to Andrea Di Piazza, because I mean, we're talking now about quite a number of measures that should be implemented. I mean, you mentioned yourself, especially regarding to non-revenue water and leakages. What does this implementation mean for water tariffs and also for affordability of water towards the consumers from your point of view?
Yeah, as we experienced here in Italy, since the entry of the regulation activity in the water sector that happened in 2012, we observed a giant increase in investments in the water sector, and especially when in the last years it has been introduced the technical quality as a criteria to calculate the water tariff. We observed also an increase in the use of technology, especially related to, for example, monitoring of the network or the digitalization of the network. So I think that in the last year, a lot has been done by the entry of the regulation, and so a new investment that pushed the water system to be also more resilient, especially in the last 4 to 5 years. So we are expecting in the next year an increase of investment between 12 to 16% per year. So I think that this plus the new investment related to the recovery and resilience facility will help to strengthen the resilience of the water sector in Italy, especially related to the effects of climate change. I hope I answered to your question.
And by doing so, also to keep the tariffs on a level, hopefully, that,
yeah, sure,
that
exactly.
are affordable. Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I would like to ask the panelists, anyone would like to come in on the comment from Barbara on the reuse of wastewater? Any specific opinion on that? Looking at you, Stipe, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, you know, reuse of water. Okay, Barbara mentioned Slovenian coast. You know, we always need to balance how much reuse water costs us. Basically, you know, how much you actually have to invest in, you know, treating wastewater to up to the level to be reusing, compare with how much it actually costs us to reduce the water losses, and then we have excess or actually sufficient water quantities water quantities of to water. The second point, you also need to look in the agriculture which are the water demanding crops. I mean, we do not expect to grow rice. I mean, in this part of the world, the most what we grow in, at least in a coastal area, it's actually Mediterranean cultures, which are kind of at least up to the the olives, the vines, etc., up to the certain level resistance. Nevertheless, I mean, it's certainly worth investing in those water reuse systems. Sorry, guys, I just have to reject this call. It's always happened. We certainly have to invest in those cases when this actually makes the sense. I remember the case there was a golf course plan that they need for large quantity of water. For them particularly, it makes sense, because if they pay for the water from the water supply, it will be very costly for them. Nevertheless, so I said we need to include economics here, and I'm engineer still. We need to include economics and look when the reuse actually makes sense, and take into assumption also the perception of the consumers, knowing that certain crop is being fed by water from the reuse system. As I said, we have such experience. There is in central part of Istria, Castelli Labinci, the World Bank financed constructed wetland, where we basically look at possibility of using the treated wastewater from the constructed wetland for irrigation of olive trees. So yeah, there is such case, but frankly speaking, I don't really see it as the large spread and applied practice in the Europe, simply because we are not Israel. Realistically, we do have water. If not from the water supply system, then from the rivers. It's just issue of cleverly using it and planning in advance.
Okay, thanks, Stipe. I think you might need to have a dedicated discussion with Barbara, because she's
Probably,
not in line with you. As I
Probably.
can see from her comments. In any case, I would like to draw another question to Roland. I hope we have a few utilities around. So, I mean, I imagine I'm a utility manager. The water loss in my company is like, I don't know, 50% on average. The electricity prices are increasing right now, as we all know. I don't have the sufficient water resources to supply my customers 24/7. So from your perspective, what is your advice for me, like short term, mid-term, long term? What should I do?
Well, the good thing is you already think about the problem. You already ask me, so this is good. It is not about being perfect immediately. It's about being better than we were yesterday. And short term, so what can we do until next summer? Well, not much. But what we can do is to for example, improve the speed and quality of repairs. Too many utilities don't have the capacity to repair the leaks because they don't have enough staff to do this. So why not use a local contractor to get the repairs done? No leak should leak longer than 1 or 2 days. So 2 weeks, 3 weeks, this is not acceptable, because this is a huge volume at the end of the day what we will use. Then visible leaks. Very often I walk in towns and I see so many visible leaks. We don't need any equipment. Just go in the evening when the pressure is higher, take the location of these leaks, repair these leaks. The next step is start leak detection. So these are all things which can be done very soon and very cheap. And of course, I forgot to say this will not reduce losses, but this is so important if our system input volume is not metered, which is the case for many of the very small utilities. Please put a bulk meter, and even if it is a simple mechanical meter, so that we know how much we consume and how much, if the inflow is going up or down. The next step, of course, then it comes more conceptual. Then we will plan the network zoning, we will establish DMAs, and at the end of the day, we will need to think about a pipe replacement. But we have heard already a number how much it costs to even replace 2 kilometers of pipes. And if I have a utility with, say, even a small one with 200 kilometer pipes, and I replace 2 kilometers, my NRW level will not, you will not see the difference. It is good, we need to replace, but short term it will not help. Short term only helps immediate action on the ground.
Thanks for this, Roland. And I mean, because you also mentioned the issue of staff and availability of staff. I think we have also discussed a little bit in the preparation of this webinar, well-trained staff and the capacity of staff. Anyone would like to make a comment on that, how important that is also in that context? Andrea, Stipe, Vyacheslav?
Yeah, just a brief comment. As a federation, we noticed that indeed investing in human capital is more important sometimes than investing in new infrastructure. So especially we should think of upskilling and reskilling the people that work inside our companies. To try to let them be responsive in the new infrastructure and new technology that you are going to face in the future, and that are crucial also to win the battle against climate change.
Kati, actually, irony is that actually investing in staff is a lot cheaper and much more productive than investing in pipes and concrete. Yet somehow, it's much easier to, much more popular. Don't let me use the word easier. Much more popular to invest in pipes than in people. One of the key messages from my visit to Pula water utility yesterday, one of the best in Croatia in this regard, was what makes the difference is not the money, is not the pipes, it's the people who are working here. And I signed to that. I signed to that. At the end, having a dedicated group is not even lack of knowledge. I mean, knowledge is there. But, if you're not interested in gaining this knowledge and applying this knowledge, sure. I mean, this is not altogether rocket science, as Andrea said, as Roland said. I mean, this is, more or less, commonly known thing. Everybody who is interested could find out what needs to be done. Yet, only too often, and I guess this is where basically financial penalty in form of tariffs and in form of the fees need to kick in. You need to basically motivate utility to become more reasonable and more rational in a way how they are managing the water that they are distributing. At the end, it will come to that. Unfortunately, not everybody, as the people in Istria, are so responsible that you apply for the rational behavior and they follow your advice. At the end, the water tariffs are a very strong instrument that will force people to change their behavior if needed, starting with myself.
Thanks, Stipe. And also thanks for this final statement. I mean, we have experienced the importance of capacity building, I think, ourselves in the course of the Danube Water Program. As IWD, I need to a little bit advertise the Danube Learning Partnership to the utilities out there. We have a couple of really interesting training courses, also non-revenue water, that you could join to capacitate yourself. And with that, I would like to come to a close because we are already reaching closing time. Thank you so much for extremely interesting 75 minutes that went past really quickly. As I told you before, the summary and the recording and the PowerPoint presentation will be made available. Please visit our Voice of the Danube website, www.iwd.at. You can also sign up and register there to be up to date with us. Having said that, thanks again to our speaker, Andrea, to our panelists, to the audience for coming in with questions. Have a good rest of the day and stay tuned and watch out for the next DWP KnowNow. So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Kati. Bye to everyone. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.